Hello, I'm Mark Anderson, Director of Stop the Press's News and Commentary. See my reports at thetruthhound.com and periodically at ukcolumn.org and 21stcenturywire.com. It was last June when the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, created by the European Commission 9 years ago, went ballistic when U.S. President Trump gave a cold shoulder to global warming. That's when Trump announced that he was distancing America from the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Coincidentally or not, Trump made that announcement in early June of 2017, right when the 65th Bilderberg meeting was happening a short distance away in Chantilly, Virginia. A longtime Bilderberg-connected news organ, the Washington Post, trounced Trump for his Paris stance all weekend long back then as the secretive Bilderberg gathering, consisting of collusive public and private elites who all tout the climate change party line, concluded on June 4th. Awash in cash under the leadership of former New York Mayor and mega-billionaire Michael Bloomberg, among other deep pockets, this mayoral vanguard has bided its time and held its first ever North American Climate Summit December 4 through 6th at Chicago's Sheraton Grand, collaborating with the City of Chicago government. About 50 mayors from across the world attended to take aim at Trump amid lofty claims that 7,500 cities around the world are under the sway of the Covenant's climate change worldview. Yet there's a big twist to this climate change issue, this concept, that I'll address in a few moments. Things are not as they seem at all. For now, all of the attending mayors have gone on record without any known dissent that climate change caused by humanity's industrial, agricultural, and other routine emissions is an unchallengeable fact. So they no longer traffic in precise terminology like global warming. No, they instead, of course, blather the nebulous climate change mantra nonstop. That way, seemingly unusual weather patterns can be blamed on humanity's routine atmospheric emissions without regard to other possible causes. While the gathered mayors on December 5th signed the Chicago Climate Charter to call for participating cities to meet or exceed the Paris Accord's emissions limits, the very latest is that the covenant met again in Paris on December 12th for their One Planet Summit. There, two major news bulletins were issued, one of them noting that the World Bank will lend this mayoral movement $4.5 billion in US dollars, just for starters, to ensure 150 cities across the world, mainly in the US though, I'm understanding, have the funds to fight climate change. The other announcement stressed that now that we're 2 years after the Paris Agreement's ratification, 3 new schemes will accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement in cities and local governments across the world, as these mayors put it. This includes, for one thing, the One Planet Charter, described to help cities swiftly meet their Paris Agreement goals, and among other things, a new set of breakthrough partnerships with the EU, with the European Investment Bank, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, representing the creation of even more debt, likely public debt, to fight climate change. Moreover, these leaders of participating cities will bring detailed descriptions of their climate change commitments to the planned 2018 Global Action Summit coming up in California. I don't know the exact date on that, stay tuned. Statements surrounding this issue show that these climate mayors, by the way, and this is important, have little or no qualm about usurping the role of national leaders, usurping national power and devolving it to themselves. Sure, improve local control and things like wind and solar powered buildings and solar streetlights and all that can be helpful if done for the right reasons. But this grassroots globalism looks like a revolutionary means of undercutting national authority, national sovereignty, from the bottom up. For example, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who already closed 2 Chicago area coal-fired power plants, noted, quote, "Even as Washington fails to act, cities have the power." Note that, cities have the power and the will to take decisive action. Mr. Bloomberg put it even more bluntly. He said, quote, "All the U.S. cities signing the Chicago Climate Charter sends a strong signal to the world that we will keep moving forward toward our Paris goal with or without Washington." And former President Barack Obama also spoke at the Chicago event, saying that cities, states, and nonprofit groups have emerged as the new face of leadership on climate change. Beyond such government power shifts, these mayors also want radical shifts in energy power sources, of course, while seeking greatly reduced emissions and a dramatic overhaul of urban infrastructure so participating cities can meet or exceed the Paris Agreement's ambitious emissions limits. But here's where things get especially interesting. ClimateViewer.org researcher Jim Lee, a very interesting and accomplished researcher, told me that he'll be attending the 98th Annual American Meteorological Society Conference, which I believe is January 9 through 11, and it's in Austin, Texas. Why? To address the panelists and expose the climate changers. Get that, the climate changers, as Mr. Lee told me recently. The climate changers, you ask? Perhaps you're thinking climate change is totally or largely a hoax. So what's this climate changers? That sounds like the man-made climate change argument that we all hear. The answer to that, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but the answer to that is yes and no. The climate changers, yes and no. Because evidently deliberate climate engineering is a reality, which means that whatever unusual patterns we see, in some cases at least, may be intentionally induced by government and corporate projects that include cloud seeding, which has been around for decades, but also include much more, amounting to actual intentional weather modification. This is very important to take into account here. Otherwise, we get into, yes, there's man-made climate change, no, there isn't, just a binary back and forth dichotomy, and we never think any further. So this in turn means that those like these climate mayors who simply blame conventional industry for climate change are woefully misinformed, or worse. Mr. Lee, who plans to make a documentary from his input at this Austin conference, spoke at the December 2016 Freedom Force International Conference 1 year ago from now and revealed documents there which show that billions are spent annually modifying the weather worldwide. In 1978, Mr. Lee noted, quote, the UN banned weather warfare with the passage of the Environmental Modification Convention, which, he said, stems from late reporter Jack Anderson's exposure of weather warfare over Vietnam by the U.S. Air Force, which was called Operation Popeye and is now declassified. This is public record, folks. So Mr. Lee proposes a law. He calls it the Environmental Modification Accountability Act of 2018 to require advance notice and full transparency before any kind of government or private climate modification project, many of those are profiteering adventures and experiments, can be carried out. So this would include a worldwide citizen-powered network to monitor the atmosphere itself for evidence of aerosols sprayed into the air by these public and private entities, along with video footage of the sky to keep track of everything. Mr. Lee added that with such evidence gathering, any kind of verified climate tweaking that causes environmental, physical, and other damage, including injury and death to human beings, could be actionable in court. And this is an interesting thing to consider as we recall the extreme and rather unusual string of hurricanes that hit Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico with such widespread devastation. Much of it unprecedented. Not to mention the nonstop, highly irregular wildfires scorching California and causing widespread injury, death, and extreme property loss. Do I mean all of these things are the result of such weather tampering? Not at all. But such questions do need to be explored much more deeply, thereby adding a vital new dimension to the climate change debate. Thanks for listening. I'm Mark Anderson with Stop the Presses News. Stay tuned for more, much more updates as these issues develop.